Thank you for waiting. The keynote speech 1 shall now commence. First, Mr. Miyazono Masataka, President of Government Pension Investment Fund, will give a speech. Mr. Miyazono, please.
皆さん、こんにちは。GPIF の理事長の宮園でございます。本日は第4回 TCFD サミットが盛会裏に開催されますことをお喜び申し上げますとともに、こうして登壇の機会を頂戴いたしまして、大変ありがたく存じております。私ども GPIF はですね、気候変動を私どもの ESG 活動の最も重要なテーマと位置づけておりまして、TCFD のですね、提言に対しましても、2018年にですね、賛同を表明いたしているところでございます。ご交渉のとおり、GPIF は国民の皆様からお預かりした約200兆円に上る巨額の年金積立金を国内外の資本市場に幅広く分散投資をする、いわばユニバーサルオーナーでございます。また、積立金はこれから数十年先の未来の現役世代のためにですね、年金支給財源の補完として使われるものであります。こうしたことから私どもはですね、いわば世代をまたぐ超長期投資家という側面も持っております。こうした特性からですね、ESG に関する問題が資本市場に与える負の影響をですね、小さくすることが資本市場が持続的に成長していくことにつながり、ひいてはですね、GPIF が長期的な投資収益を確保していくと。こういう流れはですね、私どもにとって不可欠のことであります。とりわけ、気候変動によって生じるリスクはですね、資産の種類にかかわらず、すべての銘柄に同時に及びますために、たとえ分散投資を行っても、完全に消すことはできないリスクであると考えております。さらに、長期間のうちには必ず顕在化する可能性が極めて高いリスクでもありまして、私どもの資産の安全性を脅かす意味で、ESG リスクの中でも別次元の大きなインパクトを持つリスクであるというふうに捉えております。これが私どもがですね、気候変動リスクに正面から向き合って取り組んでいるですね、ゆえんでございます。GPIF は2019年以来、TCFD の提言に基づく情報開示を年々充実させてきてまいりました。2021年度版の開示におきましては、気候変動のリスク機会の評価と分析の一環といたしまして、カーボンニュートラルの実現に向けた各国の政策の動向を分析いたしました。2021年の COP26 を契機に、世界がカーボンニュートラルの目標達成に向けて動き出しておりまして、2022年3月時点で88の国と地域がカーボンニュートラルにコミットしております。準備を進めている国を含めますと、GDP をベースにしたコミットメントのカバー率は実に 99.6% に上ります。今後2030年あるいは2050年の目標達成に向けて、各国が財政金融政策や環境規制などを総動員することが見込まれまして、この大きな政策変化の動向を正しく把握することは、ユニバーサルオーナーである私どもにとって、ポートフォリオの適切な舵取りを行う上で、大変重要な作業だと思っております。なお、私どもが行っております TCFD 開示につきましては、2021年度版の私どもの ESG 活動報告に掲載しておりまして、ホームページでも公表いたしておりますので、 ごご案内いただければと思います。また、今日は、経産省さんのご厚意で、会議場の入り口にですね、印刷物を、用意させていただいておりますので、ぜひお手に取ってご覧いただければ幸いでございます。ロシアによるウクライナ侵攻でございます。欧米各国ではエネルギーの供給不安が深刻化し、カーボンニュートラルの取り組みの停滞や化石燃料への揺り戻しが懸念されております。このことは足元の ESG 投資に関するリスクリターンの変化にも影響が出てきております。しかし、脱炭素の必要性、また目標達成の重要性はいささかも揺らいでいないと私どもは考えております。エネルギー安全保障の観点からはむしろ再生可能エネルギー重視の大きな流れが加速するのではないかというふうに考えております。さて、カーボンニュートラルの実現には、幅広い産業において、炭素集約度の低いビジネスモデルへの移行、いわゆるトランジションとそのための資金が必要であります。その際、投資家の観点から申しますと、一定の開示基準、評価基準に沿って、企業が移行のプロセスや目標、準備状況などを適切に開示し、それが評価されることが、トランジションへの投資判断のために望ましいことであると考えております。その意味でも ESG をはじめとする情報開示基準の国際的な統合や統一への取り組みが進みつつある現状には大いに注目をしているところでございます。開示基準が乱立する状況が解消されれば、企業側の開示もより効率的で高品質になりましょうし、開示された情報の比較可能性が高まれば、企業価値や資産価値がより正しく反映されて、真に意義のある健全な投資が持続していくことが期待できるというふうに確信をいたしております。私どもは自ら気候変動開示財務情報、気候変動関連の財務情報をはじめとする ESG 情報の分析の進化と開示の拡充に取り組んでいくことを通じまして、市場全体の持続可能性向上に貢献してまいる所存でございます。この TCFD サミットがインベストメントチェーンを構成される様々な参加者による活動のさらなる活性化につながることをお祈り申し上げまして、私の発言とさせていただきます。誠にご清聴ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Peter Bakker, President and CEO, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, will give a speech. Mr. Bakker, would you please come up to the stage?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's fantastic to be back in Tokyo. I was here in 2019 for the first TCFD Summit. I was on video in prior years, but it's fantastic to actually be back in the room with so many of you. I want to talk about business and the look at TCFD. And I want to place it in a broader concept of what is actually the purpose of business. If my clicker would work, then that would be even nicer. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So if you step back from TCFD and all the discussions around disclosures, what is this really about? And that is, what is the purpose of business? And if you allow me to start with a provocative first slide, today the purpose of business seems to be we're making profit by creating problems for the planet and the people. And that, of course, is what TCFD tries to address. How can we change that purpose to a more positive tone? My name is Peter Bakker. I'm with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and we're incredibly proud to be co-hosts of this TCFD Summit together with Matti and the TCFD Consortium. But WBCSD is an organization working together with more than 240 companies, all of them global companies, on the acceleration to a more sustainable world. 20 of those companies are Japanese headquartered, and the most recent one, so recent that it's not even yet on the list of logos, is Panasonic has joined WBCSD this week. What we say in the WBCSD is that sustainability has many faces, and in many ways it's become too complex for many people to grasp. So what we say, there are three global challenges that all of us need to think about. The first one, obviously, climate emergency. The second is the loss of nature or loss of biodiversity. And the third one is mounting inequality. The C in TCFD obviously stands for climate and the climate-related financial disclosures. And climate is indeed probably the most pressing of our challenges, but they are all interrelated. We all have seen the weather events, the strength of the typhoons here in Japan, the floodings of more than half of Pakistan, partially because the monsoon rains have become much more severe than in the past, but equally because of the melting of glaciers in the Himalayas. We've seen major rivers in Europe, the Rhine and others, dry up. We've seen the Yangtze Delta River dry up, severely putting pressure, further pressure, on the resilience in supply chains. So these topics, maybe once were in the models of scientists warning us for bad events to happen, are now really impacting today's society. And science is only getting more alarming. Tipping point research that recently was published is showing us that 1.5 degrees is not an ambition level, is an absolute hard stop that we need to remain under. And that brings me to the conclusion that business as usual, meaning continuing to operate the business in the way that business has always done, is just no longer viable. Economically, it's becoming more and more risky, and TCFD will lay that out. Environmentally, it's dangerous, socially unacceptable, and in more and more countries also being challenged in courtrooms. So business has to change. We need to think about what is a future that we really want. In WBCSD, we've worked with more than 40 companies, many of them Japanese, to say what is actually a vision for the long term. And we came to these words, there is going to be a world where we are with more than 9 billion people. We might actually hit 10 billion people. We want all people to live well within planetary boundaries, and that, of course, all by mid-century. And the planetary boundaries means we need to stay below 1.5 degrees of warming, and we need to make sure that we get back to a regenerative Earth system that can support all our activities. And if you really strip it from all the noise, that means we need wholesale system transformation. In simple words, everything has to change. The energy we use, the food we eat, the transport mode that we select, everything will change. And the financial sector is no exception to that. And again, TCFD is the most important instrument to create a language between business and the financial markets that we have created so far. And this particular slide means that also everything in boardrooms of business will change. It's no longer just about the financial performance of a business. It will still be relevant, but sustainability is now really at the core of what a company has to think about, plan for, strategize, implement, and eventually disclose. So the discussion in boardrooms has completely changed. It is no longer about why sustainability is important or what it is we need to do, but it is now really on how do we decarbonize the operation? How do we become nature positive, more equitable? How do we work together across value chains? How do we explain these transitions to the capital markets, to our investors, and to our financiers? And again, TCFD has obviously a critical role to play in that respect. And TCFD in itself is not the end of the journey either. As was well said by Mark Carney before me, Emmanuel Faber, this is the tool that will eventually transform the financial capital market system, or if you want to use big words, will transform capitalism. So TCFD is a framework. The recommendations and congratulations to the consortium for pushing out TCFD 3.0. But it's not just around disclosures. The first recommendation was make sure you embed climate and climate-related thinking in all layers of the organization, starting at the board, the management, but all the way down into the operations. The second recommendation was around the standardized materiality-based comparable disclosure of decision useful information. A lot of talk already happened before me. But the third element is about strategic scenarios. What will happen in a 1.5 degree world to your business model, and how can you develop strategies to still be successful? TCFD, again, will be the organizing framework which will then allow capital market players, whether it's banks or equity investors, to form an opinion based on the decision useful information that they get. And that decision useful information will come from the framework, like we've heard Emmanuel Faber, in the ISSB that is in development today. And if I may plead one thing this afternoon, let's please all make sure that ISSB becomes the one global baseline that we will all use. Let's not make the mistake of getting different regulation, different standards in different regions of the world. Climate is a universal challenge. We need one standard to take stock of our progress. But the end goal in all these changes in the capital market is not the disclosure standard either. TCFD is the governance framework. ISSB will be the global baseline for disclosures. Capital markets will integrate this decision useful information in their valuation models. And eventually, the end goal is that more sustainable businesses will attract a lower cost of capital. The minute that a business knows that its cost of capital will come down by better managing its environmental and its social risks, or by grabbing the innovation opportunities that this transformation will offer, the minute they realize the cost of capital is lower, they will know that they can attract more capital to invest more in the innovations that are necessary. And then capitalism all of a sudden works for sustainability instead of against sustainability. And that, in my mind, is the ultimate goal that was kick-started by TCFD and is now being followed on by the ISSB. So WBCSD, my organization, has done many things already on TCFD. We've worked in 6 sectors with more than 30 companies to road test the recommendations in so-called prepare fora. We've created reference scenarios, initially in the energy space, at this point in time in the food and agriculture space. And these will be made publicly available in a tool, and that will all be launched at COP27. We've supported TCFD Secretariat, and of course, we're working on a number of the scenarios and the finance connections that are necessary through a CFO network that we've built. Because if anyone from business is listening to these words, it is now critical to get the CFO of the companies involved in the sustainability strategy, in the implementation of TCFD, and eventually in the renewal of the capital market engagement. And we will not stop at TCFD. You may have heard of TNFD. You may not yet have heard of TSFD, but these are just next iterations of TCFD. So TNFD is the task force for nature-related financial disclosures. It's well underway, was launched about a year ago, has done its first work on beta releases. I think they're now in their second, almost third release of that. And by the time we're back here next year, I am pretty sure there will be a keynote from somebody presenting the final release of TNFD. One of our absolute objectives is, let's make TNFD no different than TCFD, so that if a company has decided to adopt TCFD, it can also follow the same route with TNFD. The TSFD is a little further behind, but it's the task force for social-related financial disclosures. Human rights, equality issues, diversity and inclusion will be captured in that. There's a big effort underway, the Business Commission to tackle inequality, and somewhere next year, possibly again, we can talk about it in the 5th TCFD Summit here next year. Also, the TSFD will then have been launched, and probably the year thereafter will come up with its recommendations. All the same framework so that business can adopt not just climate, but nature and inequality aspects as well. And if we get all this right, and that's really where I want to end this short talk, if we get all of this right, this purpose of creating profits by producing problems, we can finally stop doing. And we can turn the purpose of business into producing profitable solutions for the people in the planet. And if we achieve that change of mindset, then we will create the future we want. Then TCFD will have served the purpose for which it was invented, and the TCFD Summit will have gathered a bigger and bigger group to get on that journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baka. Thank you. Now we would like to move on to panel discussion 1. Panel discussion 1, responding to the global trend of constructing disclosure rules and assessing opportunities, will now start. The facilitator of this session is Mr. Nagamura Masaaki, Fellow International Initiatives, Tokyo Marine Holdings Inc. Now I'd like to pass the facilitation to Mr. Nagamura. Mr. Nagamura, please.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone, and welcome to the first panel discussion of the TCFD Summit 2022. This panel focuses on the global trend of a standard setting for sustainability disclosures and how the assessment of business opportunities is expected to develop. My name is Masaaki Nagamura, Fellow for International Initiatives at Tokyo Marine Holdings, and a member of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. It is a great honor to facilitate this panel. We are fortunate to have experts with first-hand knowledge on the topic lined up. Let me start by introducing the panelists. Next to me, we have Ms. Katie Schmitz-Hewlett, a Director of Investor Relationships at the International Sustainability Standards Board. Then we have Mr. Satoshi Ikeda, a Chief Sustainable Finance Officer at the Strategy Development and Management Bureau of the Financial Services Agency, Japan. Then we have Mr. Toshihiro Yamauchi, Executive Officer for Accounting at Sumitomo Chemical. Last but not least, Mr. Teppei Yamaga, Senior ESG Specialist at the Responsible Investment Department of Nomura Asset Management. Thank you all for making yourselves available for this session. With that, let me kick off the discussion with a quick reflection of the rapid development around climate-related corporate disclosures that we have seen over the past 12 months. Even for an individual like myself, who is regularly involved in climate-related disclosure discussions, it is tough to keep track of the progresses that are taking place in key international fora. The TCFD published its revised annex to the recommendations, along with the guidance on metrics, targets, and transition plans just about a year ago. But it seems to me like a long time ago. With the launch of the ISSB in November last year, I sense that the landscape of sustainability disclosures is starting to change in a dramatic way. We saw the exposure drafts for general requirements for disclosure of sustainability-related financial information and climate-related disclosures in March. And I assume many industry experts in the audience were involved in submitting comments to the ISSB in response to the public consultation, which lasted until late July. Many people see this transaction as a first step towards the convergence of sustainability disclosure standards. Today, we are pleased to have the attendance of Katie from the very ISSB. Why don't I start with a question to Katie? Katie, would you tell us how the convergence of sustainability disclosure standards is proceeding? And what are the near future plans for the ISSB's standard-setting activities? Katie, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Nagamura-san. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be with you all today here at the TCFD Summit. It seems like not so long ago, the first summit was kicked off. And as you noted, as so many of you have noted, the landscape has shifted really dramatically in a very rapid way. And I think even beyond the imagination of some of us who've been at this for a very long while. So if I can get this to work, oh, there we are. Like magic. So as Masataka-san from GPIF mentioned, the landscape is, and the disclosure frameworks are streamlining very rapidly. Peter, thank you for the plug, that this is the idea of taking a patchwork of standards and frameworks that are aimed at an investor audience and putting them under the umbrella of IFRS. You heard from Emmanuel Faber. So we see 5 different elements here consolidating in all or in part into the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards. Integrated reporting, SASB standards, and the Climate Disclosure Standards Board have all consolidated up into IFRS. The TCFD framework constitutes the architecture of the ISSB standards or the IFRS sustainability disclosure general requirements, as well as the climate standard, and elements of the World Economic Forum's IBC metrics are also incorporated into the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards. Where do we fit in the disclosure landscape? Looks a little bit like this. Think of this as a mental model for how the disclosure landscape is consolidating so that you can envision a comprehensive global system for corporate reporting that works across jurisdictions. So at the heart of it, we have GAAP. We have IFRS accounting standards. We have other GAAP that constitutes financial reporting with an investor focus that companies around the world use pretty much without question. IFRS sustainability standards are in the next box adjacent to that, again, focused on an investor audience, sustainability-related financial disclosures that will, over time, you see integrated reporting sort of span those 2 inner boxes there, because the streams of information in those in financial standards and in sustainability-related disclosure standards should converge over time because they affect investors. The outermost box is the box that is sustainability reporting that's focused on a multi-stakeholder audience. You can think of the actions that the European Union is taking, requiring companies to report with a double materiality view of the world, not only what's inside the inner 2 boxes, but also what is a company's impact on the world. And you see that the lines between these boxes are dotted. That's very intentional to show that this is a dynamic system. There are not concrete barriers between the things that people care about today that may not yet be relevant to enterprise value or financially material, that these things can change rapidly or slowly over time. And so our goal is to create a comprehensive global baseline for that the middle box there, but one that's interoperable with the outer box so that we can have standards that are applicable across jurisdictions that require that disclosure on impact, as well as in jurisdictions which don't. So as has been mentioned before, IFRS or ISSB has issued two exposure drafts, IFRS S1, the general reporting requirements, and IFRS S2, the climate requirements. Both of them have, again, the TCFD framework as their architecture. So I think that's a huge advancement in sustainability disclosures just right off the bat, because it's an incredibly elegant framework, as Peter said, to get boards, management, everyone throughout an organization focused on how you are thinking about sustainability-related risks and opportunities, how you're managing those risks and opportunities, how you are operationalizing your actions on that over time. We're going to focus on climate, though. So the proposed climate-related standards, again, have TCFD at their core. They also draw upon SASB-related or SASB climate-related disclosure standards for 68 industries. They are requiring disclosure of information about a company's physical risk, transition risks, and climate-related opportunities, so investments in new technology. Those exposure drafts were out for comment for a 120-day period from the end of March to July of this year, and the response has been phenomenal. We received over 1,400 comment letters. We interfaced with 400 consultations with over 30,000 participants around the world. Over 1,000 hours were taken to analyze those comments, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So what happened, before I go on, I should talk about the themes that are emerging from those consultations. There was broad support for the establishment of a global baseline for this kind of disclosure, so that's very positive. There was encouragement and an enthusiastic response to ISSB building on the standards and frameworks of existing investor-focused frameworks like TCFD, like SASB, like CDSB. And people were pleased that we met the guidelines or the timeline that we set about for going about publishing these exposure drafts. We are hearing different themes come out of that. You heard Emmanuel talk about proportionality, scalability. We are looking to create better guidance to help companies understand those issues that are relevant to enterprise value. And that's quite related to the scalability, in my view. We heard concerns about the timing requirements. The exposure drafts currently call for the simultaneous publication of general purpose financial reporting along with the climate-related and sustainability-related financial disclosures, and challenges about obtaining some of the information that's called for in the requirements. So all of these things are being deliberated. As you heard, we are really trying to complete the discussions on all of that, the consultations and comment letters that we've received by the end of the year. And I think, as you heard Emmanuel say, you will know by the end of the year very clearly the direction that we are planning to travel. We are aiming to issue the final standards as soon as possible in 2023. Again, balancing a focus and a need for timeliness, along with the thoughtful consideration of the comments that we've received, as well as a delivery plan for what happens with SASB standards and SASB standards projects, which are now the responsibility of IFRS. And we are working very carefully on capacity building so that companies in emerging economies and small and medium enterprises can take up the standards. When it comes to opportunities, I think I don't know if you want me to address that now or if you want me to get to that later, but I encourage all of you to participate. I guess that's my last slide. But you can keep track of what's happening with the standards board deliberations on a monthly basis. All of our papers are published on the IFRS website, and all of the results of the board meetings are also published on the IFRS website. And our IFRS AO office here in Tokyo will be producing translations of those deliberations. So you can contact us for that information anytime that you would like.
Thank you, Katie. That was an excellent illustration of which organizations are involved in the convergence effort and which direction the discussion is heading towards. So thank you very much for that very precious information. Now that we have a clearer understanding of the international landscape of climate and sustainability-related disclosures, the audience may wonder how Japan is keeping up with the change. Let me turn to Ikeda-san to solicit his view from a financial supervisor perspective. Ikeda-san, could you tell us the current state of discussion on climate-related disclosures in Japan and how we are expected to respond to the international trend as Katie has just laid out?
Thank you that question for me. Well, certainly Japan is working on this issue very seriously, and as you may be aware, the Sustainability Standards Board of Japan, which is the sustainability-related disclosure standard setting bodies in Japan, was created earlier this year. And well, the Financial Services Agency, which I come from, decides the regulation on the corporate disclosure system, and we already decided that the sustainability-related information should be a part of the overall corporate disclosure system. So that kind of regulatory change will be happening soon later this year. So we are very much ready to adapt the ISSB standards within our corporate disclosure regulatory system. And obviously, that is following the certain trend we witness in the global arena from voluntary to mandatory. Also, well, as many people already explained, that the TCFD has provided a certain framework for disclosing the sustainability-related information from governance, the strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. And that is also followed by the ISSB general requirements. So, well, as already many people mentioned, that the certain enthusiasm among the Japanese business community to adopt the TCFD framework as their sustainability-related disclosure standard framework for their own is, I think, coming to pay off with the recent global trend. So, well, we would like to build on that the achievements we made collectively, and well, going forward, it's important that well, the getting certain traction from the trend that the Japanese communities has created on this matter, and especially the TCFD consortium is a great achievement to gather the institutional investors and financial institutions and the business cooperation together to make an engagement and dialogue on climate-related issues. And the common language for the dialogue and the engagement has been the TCFD. And well, that will continue to be so, but ISSB standards built upon the TCFD framework will come in to be at the center of the dialogue and engagement. And we would like to facilitate that process. Also, when we talk about the climate change, certainly the concept of transition or transition finance has been the certain focus for our attention. And I believe that the ISSB standards themselves will provide an avenue for furthering that kind of transition discussion going forward. And certainly that will help our discussion on the climate-related disclosure standards going forward. And finally, I would like to say that the relatedly, there is a certain important emphasis should be put upon the opportunity element. Obviously, the TCFD also framed the disclosure standard in the way that certain emphasis is put on the opportunity side. Opportunity side is very important because certain innovation and technological developments made by certain group of business corporation will lead to the creating the integral element for achieving net zero toward the 2050. And so in assessing the corporate value going forward, it's very important to look at what potential those companies have vis-a-vis mitigating the climate change, and it should be a part of the dialogue, like engagement between institutions, financial institutions, and business corporation. And the climate-related disclosure standard should be a certain facilitator for such dialogue and engagement, and that is always what we have in mind in designing the climate-related disclosure standards and the climate-related disclosure system as a whole in Japan. And so, I really look forward to making that happen soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ikeda-san, for the update on the current status in Japan. Now, let me take a closer look at some specific points of interest out of the TCFD recommendations. As I mentioned earlier, the task force refreshed its recommended disclosures for all sectors a year ago. From the early days of the task force discussion, how to encourage corporates to identify and disclose climate-related opportunities in addition to risks have been on the table. Obviously, unless corporates identify and disclose opportunities in the changing climate, it would become difficult to attract investors' interest, which is indispensable in promoting the shift towards decarbonization. However, it is easier said than done. We have Yamauchi-san, who may share with us how corporates are responding to the growing expectations on climate-related disclosures. Yamauchi-san, could you tell us the story of Sumitomo Chemical and what kind of challenges you are facing, especially in terms of disclosing the opportunity aspects? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Toshihiro Yamauchi, Executive Officer in charge of accounting at Sumitomo Chemical. I oversee legal disclosures. Previously, I worked in our investor relations department from 2009 until March this year. In that capacity, I worked to disclose financial and ESG information and build constructive dialogue with investors. Speaking from that experience, today I will share initiatives to address climate change, related information disclosure activities, and the challenges we face. Sumitomo Chemical prides itself on recognizing climate change as an urgent challenge faced by international society and acting quickly to address it. More than 10 years ago, we established an organization dedicated to those activities. In 2017, we expressed our support for the TCFD recommendations when they were first announced. In 2018, we became the first diversified chemicals company in the world to acquire science-based target certification for our corporate group's greenhouse gas reduction targets. And in 2021, we raised our targets to achieve even greater reductions, received well below 2.0 degrees Celsius SBT certification, and released our grand design toward achieving carbon neutrality. The grand design represents what makes Sumitomo Chemical unique. Based on scientific, logical, and quantitative elements, it aims to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 through both obligation and contributions. This includes obligation to approach zero greenhouse gas emissions in manufacturing activities across the corporate groups and contribution to reduce greenhouse gas globally through our group's products and technologies. The chemicals industry emits a lot of greenhouse gases. Stock markets are paying attention to efforts to reduce emissions of those greenhouse gases. So at Sumitomo Chemical, we are focused on information disclosures and dialogue. We communicate to long-term shareholders and investors our approach to becoming carbon neutral through both obligation and contributions. This is based on an awareness of both the risks and opportunities related to the climate. It is important to be evaluated approximately through information disclosure, which leads investors to continue to invest and provide funding to Sumitomo Chemical. Since fiscal year 2019, we have conducted information disclosure in line with frameworks under the TCFD recommendations. In addition to releasing an integrated report, sustainability data book, and updates on our website, we also actively share information at ESG meeting where our president speaks. Furthermore, since 2001, we have secured transparency of information, leveraging third-party reviews of sustainability information, including greenhouse gas emissions. Moving forward, we will expand the corporate group's information disclosures beyond greenhouse gas emissions to include disclosures by business segment and disclosures of assets vulnerable to physical or transition risks. Meanwhile, some of the specific measures aimed at reducing greenhouse gas involve business reorganizations, which include cases where certain information cannot be disclosed out of consideration to customers, employees, and other stakeholders. Striking a balance between improving information disclosures and securing the anonymity of information is a challenge. To disclose opportunities, we actively highlight contributions in our grand design towards achieving carbon neutrality. Under our strategy, we share business opportunities, including building a circular system for carbon resources and initiatives such as carbon negative technologies. Under measures and targets, we disclose our targets and progress against key performance index in our revenue of Sumitomo Chemical Group products and technologies that contribute to addressing climate change, reducing environmental impact, and making effective use of resources. These KPIs have won favor with investors as an easy-to-track quantitative representation of our company's efforts and progress.
Thank you very much, Yamauchi-san, for sharing views from a corporate perspective. Now, having heard from the corporate side, you may want to hear how investors are taking account of the opportunity aspect of corporate disclosures in their evaluation. Generally speaking, companies with products and services that are catered towards contributing to emission reduction of others, as well as companies willing to invest in innovative technologies for the future, are seen as contributing to the transition toward decarbonization. Although the TCFD recommendations address the importance of both risks and opportunities, in practice, how to assess the opportunity aspect in the context of transition is less advanced in comparison to assessing risk factors. Let me turn to Yamaga-san to invite his view on this. Yamaga-san, please tell us how climate opportunities are assessed by the market, and what is the status of complying or adapting to the proposed ISSB disclosure standards. If you could also comment on how you think investors should support towards the realization of 2050 carbon neutrality, I would appreciate it. Yamaga-san, please.
Thank you, Nagamura-san. So my name is Tepe Yamaga from Nomura Asset Management. Today, I'm very honored to be a panelist in this esteemed discussion, and I greatly appreciate the METI and everyone else involved in this TCFD Summit 2022. Nomura Asset Management is one of the leading largest investment management companies in Asia, with about 70 trillion Japanese yen assets under management. At Nomura Asset Management, I'm mainly responsible for stewardship activities and ESG integration, as well as climate-related initiatives for the achievement of carbon neutrality by 2050. So please show my first slide on screen. Yes, thank you. So as for Nagamura-san's question, I believe the most important roles expected of investors are to properly assess climate-related risks and opportunities of investing companies, and to efficiently provide the enormous amount of funds needed to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, and to reduce financed emissions of our portfolio through various initiatives like engagement with companies. Financed emissions are greenhouse gas emissions associated with investment portfolio, attributing investing companies' emissions to the portfolio according to the investors' holdings. Last year, we joined the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, NZAM, and the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, PCAF, and we set the 2050 net goal and 2030 interim target for our financed emissions. We are currently promoting to reduce our financed emission in collaboration with this global net zero initiative and climate-related initiative for carbon neutrality by 2050. Coming back to the topic of the climate-related opportunities, we can think of the opportunities as factors that increase enterprise value of companies while promoting mitigation and adaptation at the same time. So the assessment of opportunities is more important than that of risks, especially in equity investment and transition finance that greatly contribute to the transition to decarbonized society. Current climate-related disclosure focusing on risks including GHG greenhouse gas emissions. Since risks from the carbon pricing is strongly associated with the greenhouse gas emissions, emissions are a useful measure of climate-related risk. However, greenhouse gas emissions are less useful in assessing climate-related opportunities because even if we investors see a company can reduce emissions, we cannot determine whether a company's revenue or enterprise value is increasing or not. In addition, Scope 3 emissions present many challenges, including double counting, boundaries, calculation methods, and data quality. For these reasons, we need to consider metrics other than greenhouse gas emissions to assess the climate-related opportunities more appropriately. A typical metric for evaluating the climate-related opportunity is green revenue. Green revenue is an easy-to-understand metric because it is strongly linked to the company's revenue and enterprise value. Other metrics to evaluate opportunities that we now pay more attention to is the avoided emissions. Avoided emissions are highly correlated with the additional revenues generated by expanding companies' market share, allowing investors to simultaneously evaluate the company's contribution to the emission reductions across society. So starting this year, Nomura Asset Management quantitatively incorporates the avoided emissions into our in-house ESG scores for Japanese equity and investment decision. In the environmental items of our ESG score, we evaluate greenhouse gas emission trends, transition risks, including financial impact by using internal carbon price, and climate-related opportunities of the investee companies by quantitatively analyzing the avoided emissions that company disclose in their reports. Therefore, more disclosures by companies of metrics for the evaluation of climate-related opportunities, such as green revenue and avoided emissions, will encourage investors to more accurately analyze future transition and enhancement of enterprise value together with emission reductions, and it promotes investors to provide more funding for carbon neutrality by 2050. Thank you.
Yamaga-san, thank you very much for sharing how Nomura Asset Management is starting to evaluate the opportunity aspects of corporate activities, including the green revenue and the treatment of avoided emissions. Having heard from Yamaga-san about the investors' perspective, I think many people think that companies contributing to the transition efforts naturally deserve positive evaluation in corporate valuation or ratings because potential for growth is there. In this respect, I may not be the only one who hopes that the disclosure standards coming up will encourage the appropriate disclosure of climate-related business opportunities. So let me cast my second question to Katie. Katie, how should disclosure look like for technologies that are hopeful to bring about emission reductions of the society as a whole?
Thank you for that. So the illustrative guidance in our climate disclosure standards point to primarily business model and product innovation, which is not surprising. And I think Japanese companies are well suited for that kind of innovation that's going to be required to get us to reaching 1.5 degrees, or hopefully. So what does that look like? So it varies by industry. So you can think of, for the automotive industry, for example, one of the requirements would be disclosure of the number of zero-emission vehicles, the number and percentage of hybrids, plug-in hybrids. So an investor could see an increase in the production of those cars over time. For home building, for example, it would be different, obviously a different industry. So we would look for the proportion of homes delivered that are certified to a green building standard. So you can see the variation between industries. We would look for the percentage of revenues from products or services supporting a transition to a low carbon economy. So that's what it starts to sound like and look like depending on what industry you might find yourself in, or whatnot. In terms of the activities for for transitioning to a low carbon economy, again, getting back to the comments from Peter from the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, you want to see that a company is looking at this holistically from the board on down through its operations. So you'd be looking for capital allocations, the percentage of revenue that's invested in R&D in low carbon products or services. You'd be looking for investments in climate adaptation measures, for example, investments in soil health, in agricultural industries, irrigation, improvements in water usage and whatnot. So hopefully that is an answer to your question.
Great. Thank you, Katie, for sharing examples of what constitutes opportunities from a in the disclosure context. Now, speaking of enhancing corporate disclosures on opportunities, one may think policy guidance and creation of a business environment towards green transformation, GX, of the entire society and economy are expected. May I ask Ikeda-san, as a policymaker, how disclosure and financing should be positioned to promote technologies to contribute to emission reduction of the entire society and investments to support them to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050?
Nagaruma-san, thank you for that question. Well, certainly the financial sector should be an enabler for making transition possible. And, well, obviously, the design of the climate-related disclosure framework, or more broadly, sustainability-related disclosure framework, should be in line with that objective. And given that ISSB provides investor focus global baseline for sustainability-related disclosure standards, I believe that the opportunity is very much a center of that the disclosure framework anyway, because in order to evaluate the enterprise value, we need opportunity assessment as well as risk assessment. So there's no question in that aspect. And certainly, Japanese regulatory framework will be consistent with that overall trend. So rest assured that that part. But having said that, well, while TCFD set out a certain framework for governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets, and ISSB certainly includes a certain set of metrics as in their disclosure standards, but I think even if it is the case, the ISSB standards has a certain flexibility in requiring which set of metrics should be disclosed by a certain company. And at the end of the day, that what kind of metrics should be disclosed in conjunction with overall climate-related disclosure or sustainability disclosure is still very much fluid, and the search for the right set of metrics will continue. And so if we like to ensure that the opportunity are going to be properly assessed by the financial sector, I think each company needs to make tremendous efforts in finding out what is the right set of metric. And as Yamaga-san mentioned, that may be a certain green revenue tab metrics or the avoided emission metrics. But at the end of the day, well, we frame that within the certain framework of expressing that how companies contribute to the climate mitigation. It comes down to the certain emission metrics at the end. And so if you have a certain technological potential to mitigate certain climate change, but it needs to be translated into the how that technology can contribute to reducing carbon emissions. So how much is very much important. Also, it should be expressed being consistent with the overall framework of counting emissions. So there are certain categorization, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And when it comes to scope 3 emissions, many companies express certain difficulty in disclosing scope 3 emissions because it requires you need to come down to the supply chain or overall value chain of the company. But I think the certain way of presenting the reducing scope 3 emissions is that I think the key part of expressing opportunities that a particular company had. So I think we need to dwell on that issue further in pursuing that the further enhancing the climate-related disclosure standards for facilitating the proper assessment of opportunity side. So I believe that in that space of debate, I think a lot of Japanese companies have a potential to contribute positively to improving the dialogue among the corporate sector and the business sector. Thank you.
That is helpful. Thank you, Ikeda-san, for sharing your view. There should be expectation for investors and policymakers from the industry side as well. Yamauchi-san, any words for investors and policymakers for the appropriate assessment of opportunities in the context of achieving carbon neutrality?
Yeah, thank you for your question. First, let's consider this from the perspective of risk aversion. We disclose a roadmap for future greenhouse gas reductions. However, many investors would like to see disclosures on their impact on business performance. Meanwhile, the impact of greenhouse gas reduction on our business performance is greatly influenced by the build-out of infrastructure, such as low-emission electricity and consumer acceptance of higher cost to reduce greenhouse gases. We and others in industry keep a close eye on these movements to better time the investment of management resources. Move too fast and we struggle to recover our investments. Move too slow and we lose out of the competition. The government could help industry invest resources by showing a roadmap for building out infrastructure and educating consumers. Also, there is a perspective of business opportunities. To be approximately evaluated by investors, we need to make the greenhouse gas reduction effects of our products and technologies across the supply chain more visible. To do so, carbon footprint needs to be more broadly adopted, and there need to be methods to evaluate reduction effects. To address carbon footprint, we have developed a proprietary calculation tool and computed calculations for our 20,000 products. Furthermore, we have provided our calculation tool free of charge to our supplier for them to provide us with carbon footprint on the material input we purchase from them. We have expanded free use of the tool beyond our suppliers to the public and hope to contribute to the broader adoption of carbon footprint calculations. I would like to share with you a short video clip about this. Please.
Sumitomo Chemical has developed a system, CFP Tomo, that can efficiently calculate the carbon footprint of products. It can be used with Microsoft tools and can handle complicated material flow in chemical plants. We provide the system free of charge so as to contribute to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions through CFP calculation.
Thank you. When evaluating greenhouse gas reduction effects, it is possible to calculate our direct contributions to greenhouse gas reductions in situations where we license to others our proprietary low-emission manufacturing processes. Meanwhile, our battery materials for electric vehicles contribute indirectly to greenhouse gas reductions through the expanded adoption of electric vehicles, making it difficult to calculate the extent of our direct contribution. Also, our initiative in plastic recycling and other circular systems for carbon resources are categorized under Scope 3 for the greenhouse gas protocols, but there are no rules clarifying where in the value chain in the contribution to greenhouse gas reductions resides. Moving forward, we hope to see progress in setting forth rules for how to calculate contributions to greenhouse gas reductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Yamauchi-san, for sharing your comments and also the video, which speaks well of your efforts. Let me turn to Yamaga-san. What are the expectations from investors to companies and policymakers?
Thank you. So I'd like to mention 3 points here from an investor's perspective. First is GHG protocol, which is a global standard for carbon accounting. And second is concern about the increased burden of corporate disclosure and investor analysis. And the last third is collaboration among stakeholders to generate new ideas and share best practice for carbon neutrality by 2050. So let me start with the GHG protocol. I think the global climate-related disclosure rules and disclosures set corporate disclosure requirements based on the GHG protocol, like Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions. While this is not a problem, we should understand that GHG protocol is not perfect, especially in terms of the climate-related opportunities assessment. So if necessary, improvements to the GHG protocol itself should be considered in the future. Secondly, regarding the burden on companies and investors, it's very great that the ISSB is now converging a variety of climate-related disclosure standards. In the meantime, I am a little concerned that if many climate-related disclosure items, including industry-based disclosure requirements, will be required and recommended, corporate disclosure and investor analysis could be more inefficient and ineffective. As a result, the companies may not be able to raise enough funds from the investors to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. I'd like to ask policymakers to develop the climate-related disclosure standards that take into account the burden on companies and investors, considering the materiality of disclosure items from the perspective of the corporate valuation and investment decisions by investors. The last third point is about collaboration. I believe we need collaboration between policymakers, companies, and investors in order to create new ideas and share best practice like the avoided emissions as key metrics of climate-related opportunities. At the end of the last month, supported by the METI, total 79 Japanese companies, including financial institutions and investors, established the GX Business Working Group, where GX means green transformation. Towards fiscal year 2023's full operation of GX3 and realization of carbon neutral society, GX Business Working Group aims to establish an appropriate framework to evaluate Japanese companies' climate-related opportunities and their contribution to carbon neutrality. Through the discussion in this working group, we intend to develop a guideline and take initiatives on climate-related opportunities by the end of fiscal year 2022. Nomura Holdings and Nomura Group companies, including Nomura Asset Management, lead this discussion and collaboration as a chair of GX Business Working Group. I expect the policymakers will actively support creating more places for collaboration among stakeholders like GX Business Working Group. Also, our ideas about the evaluation of avoided emissions, as I mentioned, in our in-house ESG scores, actually grew out of the engagement and collaboration with policymakers and companies. I believe the sharing challenges and best practices through the collaboration will better ensure the achievement of carbon neutrality by 2050. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you for touching on the GX Business Working Group, for which I am also very excited. The group had its kickoff meeting this past Monday, and I was there, and I felt that the discussion was very done in a constructive manner. So we're hopeful to come to a not perhaps a full-blown conclusion, but perhaps at least a positive wrap-up of how we can how the industry sector can really join forces in developing a framework or something similar to that may attract further attention from the investment players. So that does it for the discussion part, but I wondered if any of the panelists have any last word to mention. If you can pick up on any of the discussions, and if you can share any of your takeaways, and this is, of course, in a voluntary manner, I would appreciate it. Katie, do you have something to say?
Sure, thanks for that opportunity. So it's just really encouraging to hear everyone's perspectives and see the work of Sumitomo Chemical making that tool available. I think we're going to need every tool. We're going to need changes of allocation of capital across the entire economy. As Peter said, we need to change everything that we do. And the purpose of IFRS is to enable transparency, put better information into the hands of both companies and investors to yield better decisions. So that includes not only, and I really want to emphasize this, not reporting for the sake of reporting, but reporting internally for your own benefit to see where do we have opportunities for change and growth, opportunities to innovate, avoid emissions, and so on and so forth. And the better information, the more you can, improve the measurement of these things, the better you can manage it. So it's, sometimes we hear about the burden to reporting companies. We know that this is a change. The change is necessary. And we're really looking for ways that ISSB can take the feedback that we heard from the market and figure out ways that we can help with scalability, proportionality, help ease smaller companies reporting into the system over time through a number of different things that are being contemplated. But hopefully we can all hone in on this opportunity as a way of improving the way that we manage our companies, that investors can then see how companies are managing better and then drive capital towards those companies that are doing a better job of that, so that we can transform decision-making across the economy and investments in those things that are really required for a better future.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Katie, for the excellent comments. Really appreciate it. Ikeda-san, you have some words?
Yes, thank you. Well, throughout this session, that the Yamauchi-san's and the Yamaga-san's remarks have been very encouraging in terms of how Japan can be transformed from an early adopter of global framework to the kind of framework or rule maker of the global framework, and certainly how to express an opportunity side is a continuing challenge. And even if that ISSB standards will be finalized early next year, I believe that that kind of discussion will continue. And actually, overall, the climate-related disclosure standards continue to be evolving thing. So contributing to that, the global conversation is a key part. That Japanese companies make a positive footprint, I would say, to the global conversation. And I believe that for what I hear today, through the kind of under the heading of the green transformation or GX, Japanese companies can put forward a certain right metric for expressing their opportunity and making those metrics global benchmark and a global framework. So I really look forward to seeing that in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ikeda-san, for that. So now that I have heard from Katie and Ikeda-san, splendid remarks, I'm losing the need to wrap up to say anything special in addition to what you have commented. So as the time is running up, I'd like to close the session. I hope the session was of interest to you. I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking the panelists for their superb contribution to the discussion. And I'd like to thank all of you who have joined this session, both physically and online. And hopefully we'll see you next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Nagamura and the panelists. Thank you very much.